Good afternoon. Thank you for coming back from lunch. I'm Brad Abrams, and we're going to talk about building business-centric applications with Silverlight 3. So now this session is an all-demo session. I have no slides whatsoever. And what I'm going to do, thank you. What I'm going to do is walk through an end-to-end experience of building a Silverlight kind of business-focused application. So I had a couple of people come up to me and ask me, you know, is there going to be media in this talk or spinning things? And I just wanted to clarify that. No media, no spinning things. Yes, thank you. So Silverlight is good for a lot more, and we're going to be talking about that today. So I hope you will see this really as the start of a conversation about what we need out of what business applications need, and what works in an application designed to build business applications. So Silverlight is certainly a new entry into the business application category, but I hope you'll see that it brings a lot of benefits there. So as we walk through it, I hope it'll be a good chance to let you evaluate Silverlight. So while I don't have any slides, I do have a few bullet points. So I wanted to think about what are the real must-haves when you're building a business application. What do you mean? What do business applications have? And essentially, this is the outline. This helps keep me structured in the end-to-end demo that we're going to do. So the first thing is, I think business applications have to have a professional look and feel. While they don't have to have any spinning, rotating things in them, they do have to look like they were professionally built and designed. It helps endure trust in the people building the application if the application looks good. But the challenge that many of us have is we don't have a full-time designer on our staff. We have this very powerful platform. We know we want our apps to look good, but we don't actually have designers on staff. So how does the platform help you with that? The second one is these business applications are really all about data. They just provide various ways to sort, query, filter, manipulate data. And so we're going to talk in some depth about how to deal with data with Silverlight and what the best practices are for that. And then just looking at data is not enough. So number 3 is around how do you do data input. And not just a form where you can fill stuff in, but how do you have a great user experience for that? How do you provide some nice data validation on the client, but also do validation on the server as well, and write your validation once? And we'll talk about how to do that. And then in business applications, typically the data is pretty valuable. You drive your business off this data. So you need to know who's accessing it, who's updating it. You need to control who's accessing it. You need to be able to do auditing and logging of that. So we'll talk a little bit about how to do authentication. And finally, if we have time, we'll get to some different views of the data and how can I show the data in different sort of ways. Okay, so enough of that. So let's switch to the demo machine. And what I've done here is I have Silverlight 3 SDK installed, and I've just said File, New Project, and I've selected the new Silverlight navigation application. So I'll just run this application, and what you'll see is out of the box we have a pretty nice user experience. This is a full-frame Silverlight application, and as you can see, it's got some navigation where I can go forward and back, and it's a pretty good-looking environment. So when I go forward and back through here, you'll notice a couple of things. One is that the URL is changing here. You see this? I'm terrible at circling that. But that is the stuff on the right side of the hash. That's called the anchor tag of the URL. And from a client application, the browsers allow us to change that anchor tag without reposting back to the server. So all the navigation I'm doing here is all local navigation. So in this particular app, I have one zap that has several pages in it, and we'll walk through that in just a minute. And then you'll notice that forward and back in the browser works, so I can go through here. The whole history stack is here, so I can pop back there. I can grab this about, and I can open it in another browser. So what is your browser of choice? What should we open it in? Firefox. All right, I'll do Firefox. What, did I miss one? Oh, Chrome. Hey, we can do it in Chrome too. That's fine. We made sure this works in all major browsers. So that's Chrome coming up. So there's Firefox. We'll let Firefox load, and we'll ask Chrome to load the same page. So there's Firefox. You see it's come up, and I can do forward and back in Firefox as well. And then Firefox is, we have the browser integration, works everywhere. Chrome works as well. Let's see. So there we go. We came to the About page, and now I can navigate through here, and then forward and back, and Chrome works. So it works. Trust me, it works on Safari as well. So it's a rich integration. Works everywhere your application is going to work. So is this a useful thing? Pretty cool. Yes. Okay. Okay. Now the next thing I was going to show was. Sometimes developers put bugs into the application. That happens occasionally. I mean, not you, but your colleagues, right, that had to stay home. And what's interesting is what's the user experience for those things. So sometimes if there's an exception that's thrown from the application, or if there's a navigation that's invalid, maybe there's a bad link in there, what happens? And so we've customized with this nice error template. You notice the screen grays out, and I have the error template, error dialog that moves around. And I can put some developer debugging information in there. So if you have an opportunity to debug that, you can have a sense for what's really happening in there. And it gives users kind of a reasonable experience in the error case. So that's the default experience. Why don't we go through now and look at customizing this a little bit? Again, from a developer's point of view, how can we customize this? So there's a couple of things. The first thing as a developer we want to do is add some new stuff. So let's do that. Let's go in and add a new page. What should this page do? Any thoughts? What should we do? We've got to build this app together, guys. I don't know. Input. All right. Let's call it our input page. Okay, so there's input. And it pops me up. And now I'll just put a text block on here and give it some text and say, to do, get some input. Okay? So now we have our page. Now we need to wire it up into the overall frame. And the way we do that is we go to this main page. And that contains the overall Chrome for the application, as well as these, and that's where these navigation links are. So you notice there's already 2 of them there. That's for home and about. Let's just go through and add another one. So instead of going to the Views About page, we want to go to the Input page, if I spell it right. And then we want to set the content to be input. And that's the text that displays there. Okay, so now we've wired up a page. There's a few other things I want to do while I'm in here. So the first one is instead of your application, let's see, we're going to write a super employee placement service is our application today. So like Spider-Man and Batman, super employees, they need help too. So a super employee placement service. So that customizes our branding a little bit. But now, even as a developer, I have some aesthetic taste. If this whole business app thing doesn't work out for me, then maybe I'll become a UI designer. So I want to show you some of my UI design prowess. So if we open this up in app.xaml, you see that actually there's a common look and feel is all controlled from this app.xaml. And there's a couple of places that we've promoted to the top that are meant kind of for developers to easily go and customize. So this is the background color. And I don't know, I'm thinking what might be good here. Kind of a forest green as the background maybe. And, oh yes, I don't know what blanched almond is, but it must be good. Okay. So now if we just save that and run it, what you should see is my UI design skills. I think that's very nice, don't you? Don't you think I should be building the default template? Okay, so that's our nice look. And you notice now we have our input page here with the text we put on it. And we can navigate through it, and the input page appears in exactly the same place. So now we've created our own custom content, and that works really nicely. But, so maybe my design skills aren't so hot. Maybe what we want to do is pull an app.xaml that our designer has built. And in this case, Karina is the designer that built all the great default skins in Silverlight and the default template, and she's been working over the last couple of days on a couple of other app.xamls, a couple of other looks for the application that she'll be releasing over the next couple of days. But last night I got a very cool one from her, so I thought I would just drag that one in and we'll use that for our demo. A little lighter feel. So I'm going to grab this custom app.xaml into the project. Yes. And now if we run this, we should see a little bit better of a look and feel for the application. And really, a little bit, okay. Great. So it's a little bit better, and what's interesting about it is that we hope that there'll be a whole ecosystem of these. Because the default project supports this very structured feel to it, it'll be very easy for designers to come in and build different feels for the application, and you can just select from those. Or if you have a designer in-house or could contract a designer, they can build out one for your entire company to go use, and you can share those styles. And as you'll be seeing, we'll use styles from there throughout this talk. So that is kind of what I wanted to say about having a nice professional look. So what was the next one? So that was having a nice professional feel. The next one I wanted to talk about is doing rich data querying. What we want to do is provide a way to get data into the Silverlight client application in a way that has good user experience and is very performant over the wire and in terms of our bandwidth, our network load, and our server utilization. So let's switch back to the demo. And what I've done, I've kind of pre-cooked a little bit of stuff for you. I have everyone's favorite database, Northwind. And I've actually added a custom table to Northwind to track our super employees. So there's our custom table, just to give you a sense of what is the data that we're working with. It's a very simple database, just to give you a high-level overview of what's here. Now, the next thing I've done is I've created an entity framework model for that. Entity framework is a way that you can get a .NET view of the relational data. So if you're like me, you may be more familiar with .NET and coding in objects and C# and using link queries than you are in doing T-SQL code and trying to figure out what inner joins to use and whatnot. So I certainly prefer to work more in .NET, and so that's what we've done here by having this link to SQL model. So now we have this data, and this is all, I guess I should have highlighted it, this is all in the server part of the project. I'm in myapp.web. That's the server half of your app. I think a lot of these business applications, RIA-style, R-I-A, RIA-style business applications often are kind of equally split between client logic and server logic. And it's often just two halves of the same application. Some of it happens to run on the server. Some of it happens to run on the client. And that's what we're showing here. So we need to think about how we get this data in here. So before we do that, let me set the stage a little bit. Let's go back. And again, I don't have any slides, but what I do have is this beautiful illustration. And if I think about applications I've built in the past and I've used in the past, this is a pretty common model, isn't it? Where I have my user UI connect directly to the database. Now, it's common, but is that really the application architecture that we want moving forward? I think a lot of people have used this application architecture because it's very easy to build, right? In some senses, Microsoft's tools make this very easy to build, and we're trying to improve that a little bit because there's a lot of problems with this architecture, isn't there? For one thing, a lot of my business logic starts to get crunched into the UI or into the database, and it gets hard to find that and maintain that over time. If I need to move my data, change my database schema, move it to a different type of data store, that's really hard to go do. And then finally, it's also not a pattern that scales super well. It might work fine when you initially start out, but as that app grows up, this application architecture might give you a problem. So for years, there's been this notion of having a three-tier architecture, where you have a database and you have a middle tier where your application logic goes, and then a UI tier. And this is essentially the architecture that Silverlight and Ajax, generally speaking, RIA applications kind of follow mostly. And that's because mostly we don't want to take our database and expose it directly from the web. So, and in fact, there's no ADO.NET support built directly into Silverlight because we want to kind of encourage this pattern. But there's a problem because the tools and the several generations of developers have grown up building this style of application. And then Silverlight RIA applications typically kind of are going for this style. So the challenge we have is how do we make it as easy as that 2-tier case, but give you all the benefits of the 3-tier case? So one of those benefits in particular that I think is worth highlighting is that if you use this 3-tier case, then you can support a variety of different data sources. So for example, in the first part of the demo, I'm going to show you building out this 3-tier app using Entity Framework over SQL Server. But you might choose to use Link to SQL as well. That's supported out of the box. You might also support POCO. Does anybody know what POCO is? Is that an industry term? Yell it out. Yeah, plain old CLR objects, yeah. You might just want to like roll your own, like no thank you, we have our own data layer, thank you very much. Our system, I'll show you a demo of that, works super well with that case as well. And then finally, I think increasingly it's going to be important that data is stored in the cloud somewhere, whether that's with EC2 or with Windows Azure or with whatever data store that you have. I think increasingly we're going to see people moving to cloud hosted. And you should think about, as you're building your applications today, am I going to be able to move from an on-premises SQL server to Azure hosted service in the future? And by following this in-tier pattern that I'm going to show you, it'll be very easy to do that. Okay, so enough of those slides. Let's go back and look at how we actually do that. So still in the web project, I'm going to come in and add a new item and add a domain service. So a domain service is a new feature of the .NET RIA services. And it's our way of handling these in-tier applications. And there's an early preview of that that's out for you to download today that you can go install and do exactly this experience. So you can see it gives me a chance to name the class. And then here, what this new item template has done is it's looked in my project for any data entities that I have. So if I had a link to SQL there, if I had another Entity Framework one, it would have picked those up. Or I could select just an empty one and let me just build it from scratch. And then it inspected it and it found the tables. And as for a demo case, I've given a very simple one. And I've said enable editing, and then go ahead and generate the metadata for that. So now you see what's generated here is a pretty simple class. Let me just give some room here. That has the basic CRUD operations on it. So it's Northwind Data Service, and notice this is the link to entities one. Again, we support link to SQL just as well. Or if you wanted to roll your own, if you want to do in Hibernate, or whatever, that works just fine. It's a generic model. And then we have Get Super Employees, and I'm just going to change the name. Get Super Employees Set meets my aesthetic better. And that encapsulates access, the kind of query access to this. And now I can go ahead and do link-style queries of this. So for example, I want to be sure that everything that comes out of this is ordered in the right way. So I'll say order by employee ID. And that makes sure that everything it comes out has an order. If I wanted to restrict it to only employees that are active or whatever, I could do this link query here. This essentially gives me a place that I can embody, I can customize some of the application logic for my class. And notice all this is happening on the server. Okay, so now we've built the server one. Now we need to go out and build out the client for this. So how do we go and call these? So let's open this back up, and we'll switch back to the client, and we'll go to our home page. And there you'll see we have a couple of text boxes, and I'm just going to paste in a quick little data grid here just to give us something to visualize that data. And then I'm going to write a little bit of code. So the first thing I'm going to do is add a using statement, myapp. So notice we have myapp.web is available now. So remember, we're building two sides of the same application. The .web is the server side, and then I have the client side. So I now have that class because I put enable service access on it. Because I've put that custom attribute on it, Visual Studio is smart enough to know that we want to have a client data access to that same service. So there's no explicit wire up we need to do. So I can come in here now and create my data context. So let's give a little more room. We'll say context. And it's called Northwind Data Context. So that's a one-to-one mapping. That Northwind data context is the data the local Silverlight data model for the Northwind data service that we define. So it's a service on the server, and it's a context on the client. And I think you'll see some of the differences in just a minute. Oh, right. I have to say new. OK. Now it likes me. OK. And now I need to do the wire up. So I can say item source, context, and then I have a super employees property here. Because I wrote a query method in the domain service that is typed to return a super employee, then I have that super employee object available to me on the client to use. There's my super employee class. And then we're not doing transparent remoting here. We're not just taking exactly that class and put it here. This is still an explicit model. We feel like to get the benefits of the interior architecture, you still have to have an explicit model about when that data is loaded. So what we'll do here is we'll simply say context dot load super employees. And we'll talk in a little bit. You can do compose link queries here on the client if you'd like. Let's see. OK, now let's run it. OK, so now what we should see is a data grid pop up. And then it's going to go and do a REST-based service over to the server. It's going to execute my application logic. And then that's going to go against my relational database and return results all the way back to the client. So that's pretty good. It's a pretty good model. But it's returning all my data. I might not want all my data to be returned. It's fine for this because I have roughly 100 and some records. That's not a big deal. But many of you work with databases that are a little bigger than that, right? And you may not want to return all of those records at one time. So in RIA applications, the pattern for doing that is by doing paging. So let's look at how you would implement paging with this system. So what I'm going to do actually is go back to the client. The beautiful part is we don't have to change the server at all for this. So let's take out this code, and I'm going to show you a declarative way to do this. Now everything I'm doing you could do in code if you wanted to, but I'm just going to show it declaratively. OK, so let's take a look at what we just did. We can get rid of this. OK, so what we just did is we added a Northwind, a domain data source. So how many people are familiar with ASP.NET's data source concept? You're vaguely familiar with it? OK, so about 70% of you. So great. Basically, everything you know about data sources are true of the Silverlight data sources as well. For those of you who are not familiar with it, essentially what we've done is we've written a class here that encapsulates access to our domain service. So we're saying to call that load super employees method, exact same method we called from code. And this time I'm specifying the load size to be 20. So we're going to say each time you go to the server, only get 20 at a time. So that'll be your load size. Because you don't want to overwhelm the server. You don't have too much network, too large a request. But you also don't have a bunch of really small requests. So get 20 at a time, and then just cache those 20 locally. And then you'll see what we've done here in the client is we have a data grid. It's identical to what we had before, but now I'm binding to that domain data source's data property. So I'm getting the data out of there. And then we have a data pager. And it's also bound to the same element. And the data pager controls kind of like VCR-like controls for forward and next about what page you're on. And it's saying only show 10 at a time. So we're going to show 10 at a time, but we're going to download 20 at a time, right? So you should see that behavior. And then just for fun, I wrap these in an activity control to give us some UI about when we're going to the server or not. So let's run that. The activity control will be coming very shortly. It is in plan, but not in the bits you have. But it'll be all, I'll blog this within the next few hours. Okay, so now you see there's our data grid. And now I have some nice paging. Notice I have 10 items there. I can go get the next 10. Now when I hit next again, I'm going to go to the server, download how many? 20, and then display 10. So when I hit next, do I have to go to the server? No, because I already have those, right? So that works great. So that's paging. But now, how does paging work with sorting? So the data grid supports sorting. So if I go and sort this by name, is it going to sort the ones that are local? Is that what we want? No, you want to go back to the server. You want to sort them at the server. Then you want to bring back the next 20, but put you on the right page of those 20, right? So if we sort it by name, it goes back to the server and brings us back to the second page of those. Right? So now you see paging, sorting, all working well together. Now, who wrote the code for this? Did you do that on the server? Like, who wrote the code to handle what page I'm on and sort by what? Like, where was that? No. So the data grid handled the UI. But I think the most important point here is you didn't have to, right? What you did, and I being your proxy, what you did is you wrote a service that returned an iQueryable. And iQueryables compose very nicely, right? So what we're able to do is call your queryable and say, okay, yeah, skip 20 and give me the next, or whatever, skip 10, give me the next 20, whatever it is, and go ahead and order those by this, and da-da-da. We were able to create that link query on the client and then send it up to the server, execute it there. And then all of it got turned into optimized T-SQL code by Entity Framework, which does a very good job at that. Okay, so that's sorting, paging. Does that seem like it's a useful thing? Yes? Not really? Okay, fine. Okay. Now the next thing you might want to do is filtering. So let's talk a little bit about filtering of the data. So to do that, I need to put some filter code in here. Oh, I forgot grouping. So let's go through and do grouping first. Let's just do a quick little deal on grouping, because it's our cool new data grid feature. Okay, there it is. Okay, so now we have grouping in data grid. So what I did, I told the data source to do some local shaping of the data, to turn it into groups and to group by the publisher. You could group by whatever you want. You could make it dynamic, whatever you'd like. And so you see I can group just very nicely here. And notice all of my sorting, paging, filtering all works really nicely even with grouping turned on. So that's kind of a cool new feature for data grid. Okay, now we want to do our filter. So I'm just going to grab some UI. Don't you wish your projects had, like, put the filter here? Isn't that so much more productive? So all it is a text box and a label. And then what we need to do is tell our domain data source to say, okay, get the filter from that text box. So the way we do that is, a little more markup. So we'll just grab that in here, and let's take a look at what we're telling them. So we're saying, look, here's your set of filters, and the control parameter is from the origins filter box. Go ahead and grab the text changed and refresh that every time you get the text changed event. And then what you want to compare that with is the origin property off of my data model. So compare that with origin, and then I'm saying starts with here. So you could say equal to or whatever you wanted to there. So now if we run this, what we should have is a place where we can do some filtering. So now here I can filter origins. If I type E here, then there are several, where's the origin column? Oh yeah, there it is. Thank you. Did it work? Awesome. There we go. See, it worked with H. So awesome. Human. Okay. So again, what we're doing is we're taking that string, sending it back to the server, getting the results, and returning it back. And again, I didn't have to write all the plumbing code necessary for that was baked into the framework. Okay. So I was looking at that, and I was thinking, wouldn't it be better if the origins, we have the list of origins, so let's just provide like a drop down so you can choose from one of the origins. And it shows off a little bit more of the system. So one thing I'm going to do is change this to is equal to, because we're going to get exactly the right one. And really the main point of this is I want to show you about how to write a custom domain method. So I mentioned we do POCO, which was plain old CLR objects. So I have a plain old CLR object here called origin. And I'm just going to put that on the server right here. So there's my origin class. And now I'm going to write a method to return that to the server, to the client. And you can see it's just some nice link code. So I'm just going to say get origins, and I'm just going to loop through my super employees and find, do a dot distinct on them so that it comes down to be just those. And then I do a select on there and create origin, and I give it both the count as well to have kind of a nice look to it. So I can build that. So now that service is available for me to use on the client. So now let's look at how to actually go consume that on the client. So in the Silverlight SDK, we have another new control called an autocomplete control, which is very cool. So we can replace that text box. Instead of just a plain old text box, we can use the autocomplete control. And now what we need to do is wire up that data. So we looked at how to do that in code before, but just to help it sink in, we'll look at it. Again, I'm going to take that domain context. I'm going to call context.origins. So that's available to me now, and just say load origins. So now when I hit F5, what I should see is the application with autocomplete control in there. So now when it did that initial load, it actually got all the origins, I hope. It got all the origins. And now if I type A here, there we go. So there's 3 different ones. Okay, which one was it you wanted? It was alien spelled the right way. Two late nights working on the demo. And so there you go. So now you see a way you can do some initial loading of data. Lots of times there's cases where you need to go do that. Okay, so what do you think about that? Is that pretty cool? We're on the right track. Okay, so now let's switch back. Where are we now? Okay, so we did professional field. We did rich data query. Now let's do around validating data update. So what I really mean about that is not only do you have to have a way to do local data, querying the data is great, but in a real business app, you need to do something. You need to update that data somehow and have smart ways to do that. So what we want to do is a way to do local changes, and we want to batch those changes locally on the client. And then we want to send them back up to the server in one group, and then have the server handle those. We want to do data validation on both the client and the server. You want to do it on the client so you can have some great user experience to help your users get some good data into the app and know what's wrong. But then you also have to do it on the server, right? Because it's super important that you have the integrity of the data intact. So you have to do it in both places. But you have to do it in both places, but do you want to write it both places? So you'd like to write it one time and have it apply to both places. So we'll talk about how to go do that. Okay, so let's just run through it. Okay, so I'm going to just replace some of the XAML that we created with just a bit more. Yeah. Okay. So the domain data source is now done. We don't have to mess with that anymore. But this stuff, we can go through. Yes, awesome. Okay, great. That was the scariest part of the demo for me. Okay, so what we've done here, let me just walk through what we've done. Basically, the data grid is the same. Autocomplete's the same. All we've done with data grid is, before I was doing auto-generate columns, which is kind of a cool way to get started, but oftentimes you want to specify columns. So I just wanted to show you what that looks like. You just specify a column group and go ahead and specify those. I left the data pager. We'll come back to the submit button. And then what I've added is a new control. There's a new control we're adding in Silverlight 3 called a data form. And if you think about a master details scenario, this is the details control. So data grid, a great control for master, and this is a great control for details. It's essentially, this is a little bit mind-bending the first time I heard it, it's essentially a data grid row turned on its side. Data grid row turned up. It just gives you a form to go enter the data. Okay, so let's just run it so you get a sense for what's there. Yes, it is very templatable. It has a nice skin by default, but then you can go and control it. You'll see some custom templating here, but I'll give you a reference to a talk where there'll be more. So there we go. So a classic master detail scenario. As I click on these, the detail shows up over here. So that's a nice experience. And you notice I'm picking up things like the last edit is a date time field. So I get a nice UI for that. So there's a set of those that just come automatically. But it's just like data grid, it's very customizable. You just give it the set of types you want to use. And it can go and really put any control in there. I'm also showing this in auto edit mode, so it just comes up in edit, but it also has some great UI for switching from view to edit and whatnot. I invite you to go play with it. So one thing I wanted to highlight is that we have dirty tracking. So if I come in here and change issues from 530 to 531, notice I get that dirty bit set, right? So this tells me that I have made a change to this entity. So the system, .NET RIA Services, is keeping up with what has changed. So that guy has changed. If I come to this one, he's not changed. I can go ahead and change him. So now he should be dirty as well. This one, was it 32 before? No, it was 30. If I change it back, notice it's not dirty anymore. So that's a great experience for end users who are who are using your application. What did they change? What did they not change? Now they have a nice visual representation of that. So that's a pretty good experience for editing those, and that's dirty tracking. Just for what it's worth, if I change the data here, notice it changes here as well. So we're doing UI to UI binding here. So if I change it, there's a common model for this data. If I change it in one place, you see it in another place. Okay, so now what we want to do is make a couple of changes, and those changes are now locally on this machine. What we want to do is submit those changes back up to the server. So what we want to do is iterate through all the entities that you have locally, look for what's changed, compare what's there now with what was originally downloaded, find the change set, package that up into object graph, serialize that out, call via REST service back up to the server, deserialize it on the server, take it apart into each individual entity, validate it, and then call your update method on each one of those. So let's go take a look at how we go do that. So basically what I want to do is I have that submit button, and we want to handle the click event on it. So click, button click, navigate here, and now I just call submit change. So I'm just going to go to my domain data source and call submit changes. And that does everything I just described, all that good stuff for me. And then there's one more thing I have to do. I'm editing in that data form. So I just need to go in that data form, and it could be that, whoops, okay, it could be that, that the user was editing a record and they didn't move off the record before they hit submit. So we need to make sure that by the time they hit submit, that thing is committed. So this came up. I can come in here and change this. Change Catwoman 3, very creative data thing I'm doing here. Okay, so we have, a couple of updates. You see a few things are dirty. Now I can come in and say submit changes, and that goes back up to the server, executes them, and now it's got all these and they're not dirty anymore. And in fact, if I'm really brave, I'll refresh the app, and when it comes back, notice all the data has been changed. So pretty cool? Pretty cool? So let's just look at what happened to that on the server. Basically what happened is it called the update method. And what we got from the update method is 2 arguments. We got the current, that is the employee in its change state, and we got original, that is the employee as this client last saw it. So you can do, if you needed to do some conflict resolution code, you could do that here. If not, Entity Framework has a way that it'll take care of it for you. If you want to do some advanced data validation, you could. Lots of times a price will come in and then it changes on the server. You do some compute tax and whatever on the server. And then what the result that comes back to the client is actually after this method has been run, that result comes back to the client and you see it show up there. So that's a very kind of rich data model for that. Okay. So that's data update, but I mentioned earlier about data validation. So what are some of the data validation things we can do? So let me just run it one more time here. Do I have it? Okay. So we get some data validation for free. For example, issues is an integer. So if I type in mix here, then that's an integer, so I get some very nice data validation just right out of the box. Notice I didn't have to do anything for that. So that's a pretty cool experience. Notice I could be editing somewhere else in the form, and if I click this error summary control, it brings my focus back here so that I can come and fix that and put in a valid value. So there certainly are some data validation scenarios just based on type, but for many business applications, you really need to find a way to have a lot more customization on what your validation is. So let's take a look at how you do that. So let me just get rid of some of these windows here so we can see what we're doing. And remember in that wizard we created this metadata class. And this metadata class gives us a place we can hang some of these custom attributes. So I'm going to show you a few custom attributes in order to how to do this data validation. But one thing I want you to keep in mind is that while I think it's a very productive experience to do the data validation with attributes here, if what you want to do is read these out of a database or out of a config file or whatever your storage for validation, the system supports that as well. So the first thing we want to do is I like displaying my primary key. That's maybe interesting, but I don't want the user to edit my primary key. That could be really bad. So let's go ahead and mark that as read-only. And then I could do another drop-down for gender, but I've already shown you a drop-down. So what I want to do is instead a regular expression. So notice I'm giving it this regular expression. A couple of nights ago, I just searched on the web for a regular expression for this case, and out this one popped. I hope it's right. You can put in any regular expression in there, and then I have a custom error message. And then range is another one we have. So maybe there's some business rule we have that issue has to be within some range. And then on name, let's go ahead and set up, make this guy required and make him have a length. So again, what we've done is we've annotated our data model on the server. And because we've done it on the server, what we're going to do is we flow the metadata to the client so we can generate the appropriate UI experience on the client. But we also enforce all of these validations before your update method is called. So if somebody creative goes in and hacks your client or tries to access your service endpoint, creatively, they still can't circumvent this data validation we've done. So now you see this field is read-only. I can't change that field. Okay, hold on. Let me just make sure I did this right. Okay, so that field's read-only. This, if I type in the wrong kind of mail, then it gives me an error message. Issues, if I do something that's too big, it gives me an error. And then name is required. So you see all of those, and you see my custom error messages are in there. And again, I showed you these error messages in English. Of course, you can go in and provide a resource key, and we'll just look it up and bring up the language. But now I can navigate through all of these errors and go fix them one by one, and I have a great user experience for this. And as the developer, it wasn't hugely onus to go do that. So what do you think of the data validation support? I should mention one more thing. I'm very short on time, unfortunately, so I'm not going to show you, but you can write a custom .NET method. If none of those work for you, just want to write something, you can write a custom .NET method, and we'll run it for you on the client and the server. Okay, so now, somebody likes that feature. Awesome. So now I've shown you, so what have I shown you from CRUD? I've shown you update, and I've shown you kind of query. Now let's show you add. So what if we wanted to add a new item? So for add, so Dataform supports add out of the box, so it's not all that interesting. I could just flip this to add mode, and you can add a new item. But I want to show you more of features. So what I'll do is add another button here that when you click on the button, it does a pop-up, and the pop-up comes up. There's a form in there that you can add the employee and then close the pop-up, and then we have our employee added. So let's look at how we go about doing that. So what we need to do is add a new child window. So add a new item here, Silverlight child window. And this is essentially kind of a semi-modal class. So we'll just call it add new. And so that'll pop up. And notice it already has an OK and a cancel button already put in for me. And all we really need to do with this child window is just put a data form in it. So I'm going to add the XMLNS for the data form. And then I'm going to go ahead and remove the height and width so that we auto size. And then I'll add the data form. And this is almost identical to the data form we just saw. Because we've defined, the data form is totally driven off the metadata, I don't have to rebuild it. All the custom validation work we just did will just kind of carry forward no matter where we use the data form. And then I showed you a bunch of data binding in XAML. So let's talk a little bit about how to do it in code. Again, your preference, whatever works for you. I just want to show you the different options. So let's go to the add new window and just do code behind here. So we'll access our super employee here. And we'll just make a local variable super employee new employee. And then create an instance of him. And this is the guy we're a candidate for adding. And then here what we can do is initialize his properties. So sometimes we have some rules around what different properties should be by the time the user sees them. And dates are a good one. So what's it called? Last edit maybe is datetime.now. Oops. Awesome. Okay, I'm not done yet. Now date. Okay. And then the last thing we need to do is on our OK button, we need to go ahead and commit this. So I forget what this form is called, the new employee form, and then our commit item edit. So my confidence is low, so I'm just going to check to see if I did all the right things. Oh, right. See, I did. I forgot one. So the last one we need to do is go ahead and set the current, because I'm doing data binding in code here, I need to go ahead and set that one to be the current item. So now we should be able to run it. On where? Oh, it should be capital N, right? New. Oh, this one. No, that's the form. Yeah. Thank you. See, yes. So this is the data form. Yeah, so my naming, I wrote a book on naming conventions and I don't follow it, which is really bad. But yeah, so this new form is this. Does that make sense? And this, come on, VS. Okay. Yes. Okay, I'm not sure exactly what is happening. Things were going so well. Oh, good. VS is, but we'll just come back later. This is Win7's Task Manager. I wanted to have an opportunity to show it to you. Okay, so one thing, I'm actually glad that happened, because one thing I didn't do is I didn't actually wire up a button to show that form. We created the form, but I didn't actually wire up the button to show it. So let's see if we can find the place to go do that. Yep. See, another great comment. You wish you had those. So there's our button, and now we just need to handle the button click. Whoops. And in the interest of time, I'm going to try to cut and paste a few of these lines. And of course it doesn't. Okay. Right. And then we need... Okay, so basically what we've got is we handle the button click, and it pops open the form, and then that's asynchronous, right? So we need to get the close event, and when the close event comes back, if they have selected OK, then the dialog result is true. Then all we need to do is add that new employee to our collection, and that'll add it locally. Okay. Okay, so now let's add a new employee. There's our beautiful pop-up window. That's kind of nice. Now I should get some data validation in here. Yeah, there we go. So yeah, I get exactly the same data validation. Again, I didn't have to write that again because I modeled it once on the server. So that's kind of a cool feature. And then what I can do, I actually need to fill this in. That's my new superhero, MIX09. Okay, so I'll go ahead and fill that in. And now I've made a local change. I've gone to that collection. I've stuck a new item in it. Now what I need to do is call submit changes, and it sends that change back to the server and then brings the results back here. So what happened was we went through and we called our domain service. And with any updates that we had, it called update. Any deletes, which I'm not going to have time to show. And then any inserts. And we give us a chance to handle that. So if we want to kick off some business rule for that, we totally could have. Okay, so now I showed you query, update, and add new. And I showed you the kind of cool new pop-up window that we have within Silverlight. So it feels like a pretty complete experience. Are we getting there? Okay, cool. So where are we? Okay, so now the next thing was authentication. So we want to make sure that the data we have integrity of that data. We know who's accessing it, how they're using it. We can restrict access, control it based on users and roles and who's logged in and whatnot. So we support both forms-based auth, so you can actually have a user type in username and password, as well as Windows auth. So at Microsoft, of course, we have a bunch of domain servers, so we use Windows auth. How many people use Windows auth in your work environment? Okay, and how many use basic or forms-based? Okay, so a little more for basic. I'm going to show you Windows auth just because it's a few less lines of code. I don't have to do a login dialog. But everything I'm showing you works identically with forms-based auth. So what we need to go do for authentication is I need to go add a new domain service. So I showed you a domain service that was data-based. Now here's one that's authentication-based. So we'll come in and add a new one. And we'll just call it our auth domain service. And now this time we don't want to go against a relational database. We're going to kind of create one from scratch here. And all I'm doing is I'm deriving from this authentication base. And here is my user class. So here I could put properties like my favorite color is this, or the way I like the screen laid out is that way. I can store user-specific settings right here. So now I have, this is essentially the server side of the environment worked out. Now we need to figure out how to do the client side of the environment. Well, another cool feature of Silverlight 3 is a services model. So I can come into AppXAML, and just like I have a bunch of resources, great, I already have this here. Even though I have a bunch of great resources here, I also have a new section called services. So what services are is a place that you can store global settings that everybody in your application might need to access. So you might have a service, in this case, for authentication, but you might also have a service for talking to the clipboard or talking to some other thing. So there's a bunch of different services you could have for your application. So this is, and we're using a particular one that comes from the framework called the Web User Service. And this, what it does is it knows about the authentication service we just added to the server because it derived from that authentication base. So there's our globe. So now the application knows about the user. Now we need to just display that knowledge. So let's go back into the root of this. And just above the buttons, let's add a welcome employee button. So we'll just add a couple of text boxes here just to say welcome and then welcome the user.name. So welcome Brad A or whatever. And then we need to go into code behind and just do a little bit of wiring up to make sure the data context is right. So essentially I'm going to make the data context of the layout route to be this user context control. And again, the user context control knows about the service that we've just added, that web user service. They kind of work in conjunction. Okay, so now when I run this, what I should see is if NTLM is working and everything works happy in the browser, it should know who I am. So now the application knows that those are my credentials, Redmond Brad A. Now, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and specify first name, last name in that user class we saw and have access to that on the server and the client and have kind of a nice, pretty experience for that. But just in the interest of time, let's think about what we're going to do as an application based on knowing that it's me. So one thing that's very common to do is if we go back to our Northwind service, we might have some data like this that we want to have accessed only to people that are authenticated. So we have requires authentication is a custom attribute that you can put on your service. And what that says is I have to be an authenticated user. So this helps to make sure that's not any random Joe, and it helps you with your logging so you know who was accessing data. I can also say I have to be in a certain role, or I have to actually be a certain user, or I have to be a manager, that kind of thing. So there's a bunch of options. But if I just run this now, it'll just work. So that's not very dramatic, right? So what I want to show is I'm going to turn off Windows off. So I'm going to go into the ASP.NET settings, and I'm just going to change. It's Windows by default. I'm just going to change it to forms. And what that will do is make it so I'm not logged in. So I'm not Redmond Brad A anymore. It turns off that. So now what should happen is it shouldn't know who I am. You see, it doesn't know who I am, and I don't get any data, right? Because I'm not authenticated. But if I come back and I change this to Windows, then now, hopefully, I'm authenticated as Redmond Brad A, and I get my data. So I know who those are. Okay? Does that sound good? Okay. So that's authentication. Now, kind of my favorite part in just a few minutes, 15 minutes, 11 seconds left, is different. I want to show a couple of different views of this data. So no introduction for that. Let's just rip through it. Kind of a key point here is I need to provide a way to deep link into a state of this application. And that'll be a key enabling thing that'll help me build another view on top of that. So let's look at how we build a deep link into the app. So what we're going to do is go ahead, and there's a couple of parts to it. First, we have to display the deep link. So we'll open the home page, and we'll put the deep link right there. And then on data grid, as I navigate through the data grid, we want to update what the deep link is. So data grid has a selection changed event that we'll just wire that up. And now it's very easy to construct a deep link. So essentially, all I'm doing is I have sorry, it's not a deep link. Where's Austin? It's not a deep link. It's a permalink. Is that right? Right. Okay. Anyway, so I'm just going to grab the current URL of where the user is, and then of where the application is, and then I'm going to tack on some additional data. In particular, what the employee ID is. That employee ID. That part, I'm going to tack that on. And then what I need to do, so that'll give me a way to display the deep link. Now I want to read the deep link. So if I'm loading this page and there's a deep link, what do? Well, there's a handy method already in the template for it called navigate to. And again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to grab this code. So what we're going to do is grab the query string off of the URI, see if the imp ID is there. If it's there, I'm going to go back to our domain data source. Do you remember that from the beginning? And we're going to add another query to it. We're going to say, okay, the employee ID has to equal the query string's employee ID. Does that make sense? Okay, let's run it and see what we get. Okay, so there we go. Got a little scrolling. Good. Okay, so now you can see as I go through here, maybe you can't see, as I go through here, I'm getting this deep link is generated for me. So, and if I grab one of those deep links and I open a new tab and paste the deep link in, so if I email it to somebody, now it'll bring up the application not only to the right place, but with the right guy selected. So it's this person that I want to talk about. So does that seem like an interesting feature? Pretty cool. So I got to thinking about different views. Like, okay, I have these deep links now. What can I do with them? Well, I was thinking about a little app. I don't know if I have internet. A little app that I use sometimes. Some of you might use it. Amazon. And they have a similar. It's basically the same demo I just did, but with books instead of employees, right? I mean, basically. And they have the issue where they want the search engines to be able to access that data. So, and they also have the issue where new stuff is coming to Amazon every day, right? There's new stuff being added. So what they have is a robots.txt file that you can go look at. And then they have all of these sitemap files. And what the sitemaps are is a way that the search engine have gotten together and created a little standard for how to find all the deep links within your application. And the search engines need to know that because you might be dynamically adding new items and whatnot, as is our case in this application. So what we want to do is create a robots.txt file, and the view of the application that I want to build is a sitemap. I want to build a sitemap view of the application. So how many of you are familiar with ASP.NET again? Show me. Okay, great. Almost everybody. Okay, great. So I'm going to show you, the main purpose of the demo is to show you using the domain service we just wrote on the server from an ASP.NET page. And that's what we're going to do with our sitemap. So modern RIA applications are both client and server apps. It's not either or. So we'll add a new item. We'll go to web. If you have .NET RIA services installed, am I in the right place? Web. Add new item. We should find search sitemap. So we add a new sitemap. Notice that added a robots.txt and a sitemap. And now here is an ASP.NET domain data source control. Before I was showing you the Silverlight domain data source, this is the one for ASP.NET. And so now what we can do is we don't want this. What we want is myapp.web. Okay, I'm not going to be brave. I'm going to cut and paste it. Let's get the name of this guy right. Northwind service. And then the select method is get products. So we want to change that to get super employees. Okay, so that's our domain service. And then all we have here is an ASP.NET repeater control. And it follows the sitemap format. The change frequency and priority are optional. We don't need to have to worry about that. But we do have to get this ID right. So for us, it's imp ID. And it's not product. It's employee. Ooh, what did that do? Okay, and then this should actually be last edit. Okay, so does it make sense what we're doing? We are providing a different view. So we created that business logic, that application logic. We encapsulated it in our domain service class. We access it over the wire to this Silverlight app that you're seeing and on the same machine to get a sitemap class. So if I come in here to sitemap, well, first, I guess let's do the full deal. Robots.txt. And that's not very exciting. All it has is sitemap. So let's go to sitemap. And there we go. Boom. We got our sitemap, which is our view of all our deep links within our application. So that's another view. So what do you think? Is that pretty cool? So now let's go in here with 8 minutes left. We're getting down to the wire. Okay. And that's employee 1. Actually, I wanted to show you employee 2. Okay, anyway, that's you can click on that link. Search engine can grab that link and open up this page. And what they will see, if they open this page, if a search engine comes to this page and they open this, what data will they index? Who's a search engine junkie? What data will they index? Nothing. Nothing. Because let me show you what the search engine sees on this. Actually, let's see if this works. I was reading last night about search engines, and somebody suggested this method to see what the search engine will see. Let's see how well it works for us. Just to use links as a text-based browser, that is what the search engine will see. They'll see get Microsoft Silverlight. It would be awesome for me because Silverlight's search rank will go, of course, it'll go to the wrong site. And more than one, all the entries are identical. So now one thing we could do is Microsoft could huddle together, get all the search engines together, and say, okay, guys, here's the deal. What we want you to do is crack the ZAP, get the XAML out, parse that, and then index that. So maybe we could do that. We are talking to them. Maybe we could do that. But then what would they see? What would the search engine see if they could parse the XAML, which they don't do today, but they could? What would they see? They would just see labels and stuff. The interesting part, they would see like name, employee ID, product details. They wouldn't see what we really care about, which in this case is foobar. They wouldn't see the actual data because that's dynamically generated data, right? I actually reached out to my server and pulled that data back. So what we need to do is provide a way that anybody, search engine or not, anybody that doesn't have Silverlight installed can have a chance to look at this data. So let's close this down, that gimmick down, and let's open our default ASPX page. So everything was served from this default ASPX page. And what we've done is just for this CTP, for RIA services, we have our own Silverlight, SEO Silverlight application. We made some small tweaks to it to make it a little more SEO friendly. Eventually, that'll get rolled into the regular Silverlight application. And then what we're going to do is provide an alternate rendering. But before I do that, I need to add yet another domain service, a method on my domain service. And this one's kind of cool. It is take an employee ID and return back all the employee IDs that match that, right? So it's a select of a particular one. And that's what we need. Before we were doing that on the client side, now we need to do it on the server. So now we need our alternate rendering, and I'll explain this code a little bit. I I think I will. Okay, yep. Okay, so now what we've got is we've used the plugin not installed template. So basically, we detect if Silverlight's installed or not. Now, the search engine, I'm not going to ask, but there might be somebody from a search engine company here, and I want to be careful here. We are not trying to provide an alternate rendering just for search engines. That's called search engine spoofing, and that is not allowed. We do not appreciate that. But what we do like is sometimes there are a few users left that don't have Silverlight installed, just a few. And so we want to, some of them happen to be search engine indexers, and we want to provide a way that anybody without Silverlight can still access our data, because this is valuable data. So that's the plugin not installed. And then all we're really doing is I'm using that ASP.NET domain data source again, the same one we just saw. This time I'm calling get super employee method. And then here I'm showing an example of doing that same query string logic I showed you in code in Silverlight. I'm doing it in markup in ASP.NET. That's exactly what that is. And then I just have a list view control that just spits out in a beautiful table. I should spend some more time designing, but a beautiful table. So now when I run this application, what I'm going to see here is no different. It works just fine on my machine because I have Silverlight installed. So that works great. Now let's pretend I don't have Silverlight installed. So let's all pretend that we're a search engine indexer. And to help us get into that mental state, what we want to do is go in and disable Silverlight. So now it's not enabled. And now I hit refresh on this, and look what we get. Beautiful. Plain old HTML. Plain old HTML. Now, I know are there skeptics? There are some skeptics in the audience, right? People are saying, does this really work? How could we test to see whether this really works? Let's actually search on the web. Here's one that I indexed earlier. Oh, great. It didn't work. So, okay, I'll get to it. So now I think I turned Silverlight back on. So now we bring this up, and I've searched for Super Employee Alfred. It brings me up back to this app with Alfred highlighted and selected. So it's pretty cool. So search engine optimization right here. So if somebody does want to check Google, let me know. Is that working? If anybody has Silverlight 3 installed or not, you can check to see if it's there. So 2 minutes left, so I'd love to take questions for just a couple of minutes. Questions? Yeah. Yes, thank you. So what I have installed, I'll get back to this one in just a sec. What I have installed is I have Visual Studio 2008 SP1. So there's a free Express version of that. You can go get it. It's not like a trial kind of thing. It's free and always free. Everything I showed you works with that. And then I have Silverlight 3 tools installed. So if you just go to silverlight.net, download the tools, you can get those. And then the last thing I have installed is the .NET RIA services. So that's also available right there as well. So I just want to do a couple of things real quick. A bunch of great sessions to go to in this room in just 15 minutes. Nikhil Katari, who's our architect that worked on .NET RIA services, is going to go into a lot more depth on it, including showing it working out of browser offline, which should be very exciting. Karina, who did all the skins you see in Silverlight, she's the lead designer for Silverlight, is doing this UX talk. And there's a bunch of other really cool talks to show. And then I encourage you, we all want to get better at this conference and as speakers. So if you have this cool little black notebook, shoot. There is this little piece here for our eval. So if you just want to go in and just check very satisfied, and if you could just go ahead and fill in 3 or 4 of them, that would be awesome. Okay, cool. So 1 minute. Yeah.
Yeah, what about printing support?
Printing, Nikhil is going to talk about a way to do printing. So hang out.
Access to your sample code.
Sample code, there's the URL for my blog. By tonight, a full walkthrough, including all the sample, will be available on that link.
Thank you.
Over here, yeah.
Yeah, what you're showing with the data validation, is that only with the data form or any control?
That's right. So the data validation I showed you works with any control. There's some additional support with data form that looks nice, but what I showed you works with any control.
The next thing, you didn't talk about, but what about the push notification that's available? How easy is that? Can
Yeah,
you give like a 2-sentence about it?
No, we should talk more offline on push.
Okay.
It's coming. It's coming. Okay, last question, then I have to go.
With the SEO approach you showed here, is this going to be sort of Silverlight's approach to SEO? And if that's the case, what about if you want the user to actually install the plugin if it's not installed?
Yeah. So I have an example of showing the install medallion as well.
Okay.
And whether this is the default approach for Silverlight depends on you. We need your feedback and whatever. So I'll be up here, so please come up and catch me really anytime in the conference. We'd love to talk more. Thank you.